Now, of course, it's no longer 9/11 here, but it is there. And by there, of course, I mean the United States of America, as they reflect back on that awful day so many years ago. I want to have a chat to Bob Liff, who's the Senior Vice President at George Arzt Communications in New York. In fact, Bob, amongst other things, is a former White House advance staffer for President Jimmy Carter. And he was there, and he's got an extraordinary story to tell. I'm delighted to say he's on the line. G'day, Bob. I hope you're okay, mate.
I'm fine. You know, it's a very strange day for us in New York City, as you might expect.
Indeed I do. And particularly for you, because you were front and centre, weren't you? I guess at some point we'll talk about lessons that we might learn from events like this. And I won't steal your thunder there, but I think you got some very salient words to bring to us as we conclude our conversation. But if you can, and if it doesn't hurt too much, can you tell us what happened to you on that day?
Well, it was I was on my way to work. It was early in the morning, and I could take the train from the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and the trains were screwed up and they were stopped, and nobody knew what was going on. And I remember at Times Square, a transit worker said that a plane had hit the World Trade Center, and we all thought, well, it was like in the 1930s, a small plane hit the Empire State Building.
Yeah. And
this is New York City. You know, I mean, crazy things happen every day. And so we continued on down to work, and the train skipped my stop. My stop is Fulton Street in Lower Manhattan, and it's connected by tunnels to the World Trade Center site itself. And I didn't know what that was about, but okay, it stopped. It's like 3 blocks south. It's the Wall Street stop. And I got out of the train, and at that point, somebody said that the second tower had been hit. And at that point, we knew immediately that it was a situation of terrorism. That this was not an accident. I had been downtown. I was a reporter at the time and was at the World Trade Center in 1993 when the bombing happened. So I was coming out of the Chase Bank building, Chase Bank headquarters, and as my hand was on the door to go out the glass door to go out onto William Street, which is the street right outside the building, the first tower fell, and the concussive force belted the Chase Bank building, and it shook. And we all thought that this building was coming down. It was quite bewildering.
Jeez.
And all of a sudden, huge chunks started falling. These were pieces that from the concussive force had flown blocks and were landing all over Lower Manhattan. And of course, it immediately started snowing. And it was snowing. There's a warm September day, and it was snowing construction debris, dust from the construction, and as we later learned, human body parts mixed in. And there was a woman who was lying bleeding outside, and another guy and I ran outside to grab her, and there was a garbage truck coming by, and we stuck her in the cab of the garbage truck and sent him off to Beekman Hospital, which was about 5 blocks north of where I was. And then as I came back into the building, and mind you, we have no idea what's going on. This is utter chaos going on.
I imagine, Bob, I'm imagining that you can't see very far in front of you. You talked about snowing. Vision must have been very difficult.
It was, measured in feet, meters, whatever, I don't know, whatever you guys use over there.
Yeah.
And came back in, and people were coming down from a mezzanine level covered in dust. They were like gray, head to toe covered in dust. And another guy and I grabbed these water cooler bottles, the giant bottles of water coolers, and pouring it on people's face. And the security guards at the bank were very good. They started ushering everybody down into the vault level, down into the basement. And I said, if this building's coming down, I don't think that's a very good idea.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to try to make it to my office. Oh, and meanwhile, the concussive force, there was a terrarium, like a large, heavy glass tube in the middle of this bank that blew out from the concussive force.
Wow.
And luckily it blew out away from where everybody was heading to the vault level, and there could have been a lot of shrapnel hitting people in the bank lobby of all places.
Yes.
And so I went out and I turned the wrong way because you could not see. And that was the only time I actually felt scared that this could be a serious thing. But after half a block, I realized that, so I turned around, I made it to my building. I made it up. I was on the 22nd floor. It's about 3 blocks north. At that point, the power went out. I managed to get up to my floor, and then the power went out, and we watched the second tower fall. We had a window on the, that we could see the trade center, and we had a duck because the debris hit our window, didn't break our windows, and it was utter chaos.
You're up 22 floors in your building. You're seeing these buildings come down. Was there not a moment where you thought, I wonder when this happens to our building?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
You wonder everything. Your mind flashes a million directions at the same time. But at the same time, I don't panic in a crisis. It's just my own little idiocy, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
So at some point, I said, okay, there was nothing I could do. I'm going to walk home. My kids were very young. My older one had just started. It was her second day of kindergarten, and my little one was in preschool. And my wife went to pick them up. And I remember I was able to call the preschool and say, "Tell Lisa I'm okay."
Yeah.
And which was interesting, she said she thought that if I was in the buildings, I'd walk out through the rubble, which I told her was more a matter of faith than it was, a sense of reality. And I remember we just had to walk. The entire city was walking north. People were handing out, the hardware stores were just handing out face masks, the little painter's masks, to cover people's noses and mouths.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one guy who was walking down the street screaming that this was God, this was God's wrath, and there were people telling him that, shut up and do that at a different time.
Yeah.
Because the power was out. And for a year, it destroyed the substructure in New York City, as you can imagine. There's, below the street, there's wiring, there's water lines, there's gas mains. That stuff was wiped out. And for over a year, they had to rewire Lower Manhattan, if you can imagine.
Gee.
And they did it on the street level. They did it on the curb, and they covered that with like a tar mound. So you had these large mounds for a year.
Yeah.
But this is New York City. I mean, it's hard to knock us to our knees, but we got knocked to our knees.
Yeah. When you had to go home or chose to go home, I'm assuming the only thing you could do was to walk home. How were you physically? I mean, I'm seeing you. I'm visualizing you walking through this what was first apparently snow. I'm assuming that you're going to work in a tailored suit looking $1 million and very much different just an hour or so later. How did you get home?
Well, except for the tailored suit and looking like $1 million, because I was a former reporter and I dressed appropriately.
Oh, okay.
You eventually walked out of the snow. It became lighter and lighter.
Yeah.
The walk home, I remember intensely reaching Greenwich Village, where St. Vincent's Hospital is no longer there, but St. Vincent's Hospital, they had the entire emergency room outside with, waiting for victims. They went into a trauma response, and they didn't receive any patients. And because people were wiped out, people were killed instantly. There was nothing left. They didn't receive, and there was a huge line of people lined up for blood. I mean, lined up to give blood. I mean, what was there to do? There was a sense of temptation and a sense of solidarity. And, there is no experience to compare it to in my life in New York City.
Yeah.
And, or anywhere. And I just intensely remember, because it was also a press area set up right outside the hospital, and I knew a lot of the reporters. I had just been laid off earlier that year. I had just been laid off from the Daily. I'd just been laid off from the Daily News, so I was friends with all the reporters, and that's where I almost started crying, because you kind of suppress your emotional reaction in order to deal with the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then as the moment recedes, it kind of washes over you.
Yeah.
And just kept walking home. Actually, the trains, when you got to around Madison Square Garden, Penn Station. The trains were running north of there, so I was able to get a train that got me the rest of the way uptown.
When was your whole family reunited? So your wife and your two children. When did you get all together?
Probably 3 hours later, 4 hours later. I mean, they knew I was okay. And but it's just, and then I had to come to work. The pile, what we called the pile at Ground Zero, which was the pile of rubble, burned for 100 days.
Yeah. And
you had that smell of smoke permeating throughout Lower Manhattan. Going over to Jersey, going over to Brooklyn. I mean, it was for 100 days, and you would be uptown and you'd see this incredible parade of flatbed trucks, iron workers. It's not just firefighters and the first responders were not just in uniform. They were also construction workers from all over the metropolitan area heading down to that site to, just do what you can do.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's, obviously that was my experience.
Yes.
My experience was very intense for me, but it's, the city survived, but 3,000 people didn't.
I know. Is there a lesson from this? We were talking before off air, and you've reached a conclusion, haven't you?
Well, the conclusion is kind of helpless, but it's that when it comes to terrorism, it doesn't matter who you are; it only matters where you are. I mean, I was irrelevant. It's just the luck of the draw. And there were people I was close to who were in that building, who worked in that building, people who were in that building for non-work reasons. There was a big shopping area in the basement of the building, and it just didn't matter who I was.
Yeah.
If I had been somewhere else, there you go. In the aftermath, there was a significant, it's also a test of the values of the city.
Yeah.
And there was a real sense of unity. We weren't attacked by Muslims. We were attacked by people misusing, we weren't attacked by Islam. We were attacked by these horrific terrorist people.
Yeah.
And, who were using the name of a religion in order to justify what they were doing. I mean, I think George W. Bush was a horrendous president, but, the most important thing he did in the aftermath was to go to visit a mosque.
Yeah.
And, to kind of underscore that point. That's something I think our current president would not be capable of doing, because the man is devoid of empathy. So, don't get me wrong about what I think of George W. Bush's presidency, but that's his finest moment.
Yeah.
And it was very important for us being able to go forward as a city.
Yeah.
So, but to this day, it's this day, is a very somber day in the city.
I can imagine. Do many New Yorkers stay away from the downtown area, or do they make it a point of going in there and just remembering, paying their respects?
I mean, I think that I think people don't stay away from Lower Manhattan. I mean, I think people come down here. I assume there are some people. I mean, there are schools. There's the stock exchanges down here. There's thousands of people. We have that new, somewhat less than spectacular building on the site.
Yeah.
That's my architectural criticism. There's nothing to do with anything else.
Yes.
So no, I mean, I don't think people avoid the area. I think that, I personally, I've been to the memorial, but I don't want to revisit the day. I don't want to see movies about the day. I don't want to see even documentaries about the day. I lived through the day.
Yeah.
I want to revisit it in my own way, emotionally, however else you want to see it. So it's not, I don't need to have somebody remind me about what happened.
Yeah.
And remember, I walked away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not as if, I have too many friends whose parents, too many friends themselves, too many people I knew, firefighters. I was a reporter. I knew an awful lot of firefighters who died on that day. Some, the brass, the number 2 in the department died. A chaplain who I went to Israel with on a story, who I covered when Mayor Dinkins went to Israel. I went on that. Then Father Michael Judge. First person to die was hit by falling debris before the building even came down. There's a lot of people I knew. I probably knew 10, 12 people who died that day. So, and I'm here to talk about it. So I don't want to lose any sense of perspective.
Yeah.
I'm here to talk to you about it, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
Yeah, of course. Bob, I really appreciate your time. It must be so very difficult, but you've painted the complete picture for us so far away. We're thinking of New Yorkers today and those outside of New York. Of course, I think it was Flight 93 and, of course,
in Pennsylvania.
At the Pentagon as well. A horrible day.
Yes.
But I appreciate your time and I wish you all the very best, Bob.
Thank you.
All the best to you.
Take care.